Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 479. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about on today's show, including the UN Security Council plans to vote on the U.S.-sponsored resolution to send a Kenyan military deployment to Haiti. So I'll be breaking that down and a whole lot more on today's show. Please share the show, hosted at the Libertarian Institute, reprinted on the blog at antiwar.com. We post a video version of the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee, and then you can find the show anywhere where there are audio podcasts. All right, let's get into the news today. All right, so as I mentioned there in the intro, and we've been talking on the show quite a bit recently, the UN is considering sending troops to Haiti, and this is a resolution that has been led by the U.S. So this is from October 1st at the Libertarian Institute. The United Nations' most powerful body is set to vote on a U.S.-backed resolution that will authorize a Kenyan-led military force to be sent into Haiti. The White House hopes the deployment will restore order to Port-au-Prince, where gangs are estimated to control 80% of the capital city. However, the UN legacy in Haiti is causing more harm than providing aid. The U.S. drafted UNSC resolution to authorize sending a Kenyan-led multinational force into Haiti for 1 year will be voted on Monday. And that it's being voted on for 1 year, I think, is more either UN rules or just procedure. This is typically how missions to the UN work. They're voted on every year. And so I'm not surprised that that's how it's going to work, and I also don't think that means the deployment will only last a single year. So, according to the legislation, the troops will work with local police to plan and conduct joint security operations as it works to counter gangs and improve security conditions in Haiti. The forces will help to secure the critical infrastructure sites and transit locations, such as airports, ports, and key intersections. Port-au-Prince has faced growing violence since Haitian President Jovenel Moïse was assassinated in 2021. Washington-backed Ariel Henry's claim to power in Port-au-Prince. Henry has been a vocal backer of a UN mission, even as Haitians have voiced dissent. When contacted by the AP for a statement on Monday's vote, Henry's office said it was unable to respond because it was unaware of the schedule. And so this is, I thought, was very interesting, kind of very telling about this vote and who's really behind it. You know, if the Haitian government was really the one pushing and driving the thing, and I know Haiti doesn't sit on the UN Security Council, and the Haitian government is in shambles, you would still think that Ariel Henry would be very aware, his office would be very aware of when this vote was happening. And so this really suggests that he's just a pawn in the U.S. game here. And there's a fantastic article by Brad Pierce at his Substack that's titled Wayward Rambler. We ran a couple of his articles on antiwar.com. He actually wrote an original for us at the Libertarian Institute a couple weeks ago that we reprinted at antiwar.com. So if you're not familiar with Brad yet, I recommend checking out his Substack just because he writes a lot of important stuff. He had a fantastic article about the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh maybe a week before the Azeri. I don't know if you really call it an invasion, just more military pressure that has led to, significant concessions by the Nagorno-Karabakh government and basically an agreement for all the Armenians to leave that territory. So it's extremely sad. And, a lot of human rights abuses going on in the meantime, too. But I believe, I think 75% or something of what I heard now of the people have left for Armenia. And then again, on top of that, there's been, I guess anybody who resists is kind of just being swept up by the Azeri military. And that means potentially even just being killed, executed. So that's a horrible, horrible situation. Again, check out Brad's work on that. But back to the Haiti situation and why I brought up Brad in the first place is, he really goes through and talks about how Ariel Henry is the prime minister, but wasn't even the prime minister when Moïse was assassinated. That was actually Claude Joseph. And a couple days after there was a plan in place, that was public for Ariel Henry to succeed Joseph as the prime minister, but that wasn't a position that he was in when Moïse was assassinated. And so, you basically now have a government in Haiti that is entirely unelected. There's no senators left. The prime minister, that role is really meant to oversee the government, but oversee the legislator, right? And so now you have a prime minister who's the head of state with absolutely no legislator whatsoever is a wild thing. And Brad points out in his article that it may be one of the only times in the world you have a quote democracy that has no elected officials and a prime minister without a legislator to sit over. So really crazy. And then I just kind of wrap up my article here by mentioning things that we've talked about on the show quite a bit. And that is the UN last authorized the deployment to Haiti in 2004, which lasted until 2017. That mission was plagued by human rights abuses committed by the occupying forces. Sexual abuse, even of underage girls, was rampant. Additionally, UN forces caused a cholera outbreak that killed nearly 10,000 people. And what you know, at this time, they say that they've solved the problem. They're not going to have another cholera outbreak because they have in the UN resolution that they have to dispose of waste and sewage properly. Now, if you actually have to tell these UN peacekeepers that you can't dump sewage into drinking water in order to prevent them from committing abuses and atrocities, and you would never be able to write legislation or laws extensive enough to make sure that they behaved appropriately, if you have to say that you can't dump sewage into drinking water. And so honestly, that is almost more discouraging that they felt the need that they had to write it, and that there's just that the UN hasn't adopted some standard by now that for how UN peacekeepers operate in increasing the standards. And anybody who's accused of abusing an underage woman, not only are they going to face justice for that, but they're going to have to provide financial support to the woman, which is often something that never happens. I wrote an article, I believe 6 months or a year ago, that found that even though tens of thousands of women have been impregnated by UN peacekeepers occupying forces in their countries, oftentimes underage women, oftentimes the consent is at least questionable. There's never been a case of the soldier peacekeeper actually having to pay any child support to that woman. So just abuses that are absolutely rampant among human rights or UN peacekeepers, and we're going to have 1,000 to 2,000 of them in Haiti. 1,000 of them will be Haitians or Kenyan soldiers, and then my understanding is there's a lot of Caribbean, Latin American countries, these kind of small island countries that exist in the area, who have also committed a few soldiers to add to the Kenyan deployment. So we'll see exactly how it goes, and I plan to keep an eye on this. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he believes troops will be there in a couple months. Now, last thing to mention, it is unclear if the resolution will actually pass the UNSC. Any of the 5 permanent members of the body, that's the US, UK, France, Russia, and China, can kill any pending matter. Washington's relationship with Beijing and Moscow are near historic low points, so either Russia or China could veto the American resolution just, to interfere what the U.S. is trying to do at the UN. I guess I'm not so sure that in Moscow or Beijing, they're not sitting there thinking that, well, this is absolutely going to blow up in the Americans' faces. It's right in their backyard. They're sending the Kenyans in who have a track record of human rights abuses. And so, I don't think in Moscow they're sitting there thinking of, oh, what's going to happen to the poor individual Haitians. They're thinking of this on geopolitical strategic level where, we're just going to let the Americans make another major mistake right off, right outside their own borders. And so it could end up going through. Russia and China could protest. My assumption is that if Russia or China doesn't veto, the U.S. does have enough votes to go ahead and pass this, even without the Russia and China support, voting for the resolution. Just as long as they don't veto it, that'll probably be enough. All right, so we got some more U.S. meddling in this hemisphere. This from Dave DeCamp, October 1st, antiwar.com. U.S. signs deal that will allow military deployments to Ecuador. The Biden administration has quietly struck a deal with the Ecuador government to deploy troops to the country and patrol the waters off its coast to combat the drug cartels. Select members of Congress were informed of the agreement on Wednesday and during a closed-door meeting with the Ecuadorian president, who was in Washington to sign the deals. The State Department did not publicize the agreements, but a State Department official confirmed the deals were signed in a comments to the Washington Examiner. The maritime deal will allow the U.S. Coast Guard to patrol the waters off of Ecuador's coast, an area where Colombian cartels transport cocaine. The second agreement outlines the terms by which U.S. troops could be deployed to Ecuador, known as the Status of Forces Agreement. The details of the agreement are not known, and it's also unclear if that means U.S. troops will be deployed imminently. And then Representative Dan Crenshaw from Texas, and he's, I think better known as Eye Patch McCain. That doesn't mean we're going to do it, but it means we can, and it means that that they are making a very clear signal that they want us to be more involved. And so very disturbing. We need to start to curtail and end the drug war, not to ramp it up. This is only going to, much like probably the Haitian UN mission, blow up in Washington's face. All right, next up, an article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute at the end of last week. SpaceX awarded $70 million Pentagon contract for Starshield. Elon Musk owned SpaceX, inked a deal with the Department of Defense to provide the Pentagon with a secure satellite-based communications network. Recently, several members of Congress have attacked Musk and called for an investigation into SpaceX's contracts with the Pentagon. On Wednesday, CNBC confirmed from a Space Force official that SpaceX will made a $70 million agreement with the Pentagon on September 1st. Under the contract, the Musk-owned company will provide the Department of Defense with Starshield. According to SpaceX, Starshield is a variation of Starlink, but designed for militaries. Starshield leverages SpaceX's Starlink technology and launch capability to support national security efforts. While Starlink is designed for consumer and commercial use, Starshield is designed for government use with internal focus on three areas. So that is the explanation of it on the SpaceX website. Earlier this month, a biography by Walter Isaacson alleged that Elon Musk ordered his company to shut off Starlink in Ukraine to prevent an attack on a Russian naval base. However, the author quickly revised his account to explain that Kiev sent Musk an emergency request to expand the range of Starlink to cover Russian territory. Musk explained that Kiev's request was denied because SpaceX needed to comply with American sanctions on Russia, and those sanctions on Russia, prevented Starlink from being active over the Russian mainland or the Crimean Peninsula because you're not allowed to provide those services to Russians under sanctions. So, additionally, SpaceX terms of service explicitly state that using Starlink for a military attack would violate American laws. Musk also said that he would have authorized the Ukrainian request had it come through the U.S. government. And so basically, this is, I think, very important to kind of flesh out the nuance here because some people really praise Elon Musk for what happened here, and I don't think he deserves it. Essentially, what Musk said is that had this come in the appropriate legal way, he would have authorized this and allowed the Ukrainian attack to go through on the Russian naval base. Now, again, I think this is important to point out too, because everybody just pretends that had Musk, allowed the attack to go through, there's no question that would have been successful. And I, think there's fair reason to, suggest that anything could have happened in this, explosive laden submarine that was apparently heading towards the Russian fleet. Could have been detected and intercepted by different kinds of Russian electronic and, submarine technology that I'm sure that the Russian military has and is actively using around the Crimean Peninsula. So, that's all really important to understand. However, several members of Congress have smeared Musk as an asset of Russian President Vladimir Putin. So they like the initial story that Isaacson put forward more than the clarification. And this includes Senators Jack Reed, Jeanne Shaheen, Elizabeth Warren, and Tammy Duckworth, who all suggested that must deny the request to aid the Russian war effort and called for an investigation into Musk's own companies contracting with the Pentagon. And so I'm not sure if maybe these senators have realized that they were just wrong and have now shut their mouth about this, just like Tammy Duckworth did about the Afghan bounty story. You know, this woman who sits in the Senate spent 100+ days going on Twitter every single day and saying that the president of the United States was allowing Moscow to pay the Taliban to kill American soldiers with no evidence for it whatsoever. And the American people believed it. She doesn't get like misinformation strikes. She doesn't get kicked off of Twitter or Facebook or nothing. You know, regular people do. And then whenever it comes out as a fraud, she's just able to shut her mouth and go on. And, you know, it's not like every single news program she goes on, they're not asking for her to apologize for lying to the American people every single day. There's no concern about it whatsoever. And so this seems to be another case where senators are just able to spout obviously false lies and get away with it. And so, you know, when you wonder if there's a member of Congress who really thinks that he could open a door by pulling a fire alarm, judging by how smart his colleagues are, it might actually be possible. All right, so now let's move on to Russia news and Ukraine war news. And we're going to start off here with an article by Connor Freeman. Now, Connor, co-host of the show, was on Friday's show, and we were talking about the budget deal. And at the time, it looked like we were headed for a shutdown. Fortunately, that didn't happen. But, you know, the shutdowns really don't shut down the government anyway. So fortunate, unfortunate, it didn't happen. So Connor writes here, a partial shutdown of the federal government, which seemed inevitable amid battles over spending in both chambers of Congress, was averted after the House and Senate passed a stopgap funding bill without any Ukraine aid on Saturday night. Passed before the midnight deadline, the bill will fund the government until November 17th at the 2023 spending levels. And just imagine this, you're an organization that is going trillions of dollars into debt every year, and now you can't pass a budget. And so rather than having to agree to any kind of decrease in budget, you all just agree that you're going to keep doing the same thing. It's absolutely absurd. As a result of growing GOP opposition to massive White House spending on the proxy war against Russia, aid to Ukraine was dropped from the House leadership continuing resolution, along with spending cuts to various government agencies and additional border security funds desired by the Republicans. In order to secure passage of the bill, Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy needed support from the other side of the aisle, since the GOP opposition to a short-term funding bill was precluded in the Speaker's slim majority. And so there are members of Congress, you know, I the best among them would be Thomas Massie, but, you know, I think typically the headlines lump them in with Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who don't want any more funding for Ukraine and want other different things with the spending bills. They don't want additional continuing resolutions. They want the government to be funded as it should, and that is there's 12 different appropriation bills, and so State Department would be one, the Department of Transportation be another, the Pentagon be another, and these should all be funded separately. And on top of that, you know, really ideally, the Ukraine aid would come separately too, border security would come separately. You know, Congress should be voting on and passing bills that, you know, fund a few $1 billion at a time, not trillions of dollars at a time, or hundreds of billions of dollars at a time, as it usually is. And when you debate and argue things in smaller numbers, there's probably a whole lot less corruption going on. So you know, I hate this continuing resolution stuff, but that's the way it works. And again, you know, kind of my prediction at the beginning is that we either get a shutdown or a couple continuing resolutions. Either way, you know, the government really doesn't shut down. They just stop paying a few people who provide, you know, from really necessary to questionable services like flight controllers and stuff like that, to, just the people who clean up the Capitol building and everything. And those people do have to go out without paychecks. Those are, average, hardworking Americans, and it's unfortunate for them. But look, anybody who's had a job for a private or semi-private company has probably at some point felt like their job was in jeopardy because, the company was either shifting directions or, was struggling and stuff like that. And so, if you work for the federal government, you had to experience some instability in your life too. That's just a part of what comes with the job. And, I have some sympathy, but at the same time, not so much that I believe that a government shutdown shouldn't happen just to keep, a few people getting their paychecks every week. The U.S. government is too big and does too much and should be shut down. And, those people should probably have to go find different jobs or, just the way the structure of it is all, reworked. So anyways, just looking at what's going to happen here, it seems like the plan is going to be the House is still trying to pass a separate appropriations bills. They're still looking at doing the Ukraine deal separately, although now I think they want to pair it with any border security stuff. So I guess they figure they'll get the Republicans in line that way. I still am not so sure what they're worried about just doing an independent vote on the Ukraine aid. Certainly there would be, I don't know, maybe a few dozen, 5, 6 dozen. So, we are talking about 50, 60, 70, maybe Republicans who really would vote against more aid to Ukraine. I do wonder if they're basically just concerned about passing the Ukraine aid on its own because they think that the Republicans will have enough influence to be able to appoint a special inspector general to oversee the Ukraine aid. And they must know that it's so corrupt and so mismanaged, and there's no documentation and there's no clear track record of what we've sent to Ukraine and when and how much all of that has cost, that having a special inspector general would create a massive political problem. So they're doing everything they can to avoid having any oversight over that aid. Because I really don't think there's any possibility that, on a straight up and down vote in the House and Senate for $24 billion for Ukraine, that it doesn't get approved. And so when you ask yourself, what's the potential issue? I think it's that, they're worried that there's going to be some oversight injected into that legislation. Now, I guess one other thing that might be worth mentioning here is that there are 71% of Republicans and 55% of overall Americans who do oppose more aid. And so maybe there are a lot of congressmen who just don't want to be on record voting for more aid. Even if they do support it, they don't want to be on record for it. And so they need it paired with other things to at least give themselves cover. And so, they could go back to their constituents and say, yeah, I really didn't want to vote on $24 billion for Ukraine, but let me tell you something. It was the only way the Democrats were going to let us get our border security money, and I had to do something to stop the invasion at the southern border. And so that's how they're going to probably justify it. Now, Biden seems pretty upset with all this. He tells Congress to stop playing games and pass new Ukraine aid, which honestly, I'm not sure what the president is such a rush in. If the Pentagon wanted to, they could probably just fudge the numbers however they need to create whatever kind of budget, kind of gap they need to send more aid to Ukraine, just like they did with the $6.2 billion in Ukraine funding that they're currently using. That $6.2 billion in PDA, Presidential Drawdown Authority funds, where they are able to send American weapons directly to Ukraine. The Ukrainians or the Pentagon just decided, we had an accounting error, and here's $6.2 billion more dollars. And so I'm sure they could find a way to do something like that again. Anyways, Dave DeCamp here from October 1st. President Biden on Sunday told Congress to stop playing games and authorize an additional $24 billion to Ukraine that he requested, which would bring total U.S. spending on the proxy war in Ukraine to about $137 billion. Biden's comments came after Congress passed a stopgap funding bill that at the last minute on Saturday to avert a partial government shutdown that did not include money for Ukraine. The White House wanted a $24 billion aid package for Ukraine to be included in the bill. Biden said, "We cannot, under any circumstances, allow the American support for Ukraine to be interrupted. We have time, not much time, and there will be an overwhelming sense of urgency. The vast majority of both parties, Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate, support helping Ukraine and the brutal aggression that has been thrust upon them by Russia. Stop playing games, get this done." House Speaker McCarthy stripped Ukraine spending from the stopgap bill due to opposition from a small but loud minority of House Republicans who are against the proxy war. Democrat leadership said they expect McCarthy to call a separate vote on Ukraine aid. Representative Matt Gaetz, a Republican from Florida, said on Saturday night that McCarthy made a slide Ukraine deal with Democrats and didn't tell House Republicans until after the stopgap bill was passed. President Biden also said on Saturday that he expects the speaker to keep his word and secure the passage of support for Ukraine at this critical moment. Gaetz, who has been a staunch opponent of the proxy war in Ukraine, has been publicly feuding with McCarthy and said Sunday he plans to move forward with an effort to unseat the speaker. "I do intend to file a motion to vacate against Speaker McCarthy this week. I think we need to rip off the Band-Aid. I think we need to move on with leadership that's untrustworthy. Or move on with leadership that is trustworthy." So Gaetz and other Republicans have made it difficult for Biden to get more money to spend on Ukraine. The majority in Congress still supports the proxy war, and the $24 billion is expected to easily pass once it's brought for a vote. But opposition is growing and likely will be harder for the U.S. to keep fueling the war as the conflict drags on. And this is not just a trend in Washington or in America. Party that opposes Ukraine aid wins Slovakia election. So a populist party in Slovakia that opposes providing military assistance to Ukraine has won the country's elections, a vote that could signify change the NATO members' foreign policy and support for the proxy war. The former Prime Minister Robert Fico, who leads the Slovak Social Democracy Party, known as SMER-SD, campaigned on ending military aid to Ukraine. Fico doubled down on his position after winning the vote, saying people in Slovakia have bigger problems than Ukraine. So we'll see what comes of this. I'm not particularly familiar with the Slovak government, but assuming that he's able to follow through and maintain the control that he has, this certainly seems interesting. So while this is going on, and it seems that maybe Kiev will receive less military support next year than they did this year, Moscow announces massive military spending increase to combat NATO's hybrid war in Ukraine. Connor Freeman wrote this last week. Moscow announced that it plans to increase military spending by nearly 70% in 2024 as it fights what the Kremlin has dubbed NATO's hybrid war. Russia's defense budget next year, which was dwarfed by the Pentagon budget, will still be less than the total amount that the U.S. has already pledged to send to Kiev to assist its proxy war with Moscow. And so next year, the Russian defense budget will be $111 billion. And again, even without that $24 million package, that is more than Washington has sent to Ukraine over the past year and a half. At the same time, the Pentagon budget is fast approaching $900 billion, greater than the next 10 countries combined, while total yearly spending on the national security state is really $1.5 trillion in the United States. So very interesting that Russia is doing this. I guess not interesting or really surprising, but it does maybe sound like Russia is realizing that this is going to be a multi-year conflict, and it's probably not only just building up military forces, but also looking at the long term, building more bombers and things like that. All right, next up, this from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. Russia has gained more territory this year than Ukraine. Russian forces had gained more territory in Ukraine this year than Ukrainian side, despite the Ukrainian counteroffensive that was launched in June. The report noted that despite 9 months of heavy fighting in Ukraine, only about 500 square miles of territory have changed hands this year. Russia has gained 331 square miles, while Ukraine has gained 143, a difference of 188, which amounts to Russia's net gain in territory so far this year. Most of the fighting in the first half of the year focused around the Donbass city of Bakhmut, which Russia fully captured in May after a brutal battle that started in August of 22. Ukraine's counteroffensive has focused on the south, but fighting has continued near Bakhmut and across the eastern front. The New York Times quoted Marina Marin, a postdoctoral researcher at the King's College of London, who said Russia appears to be comfortable holding the territory it currently controls rather than seeking rapid gains. And if anybody wants to, is watching the show right here, you can see the map. The areas that are in red, darker red, are areas gained by Russia this year. The area in darker blue are the areas gained by Ukraine. And as you can see, it's really not substantial in any way on either side, but there's certainly more red than there is blue. All right, Zelensky is now pitching arms makers on producing weapons in Ukraine, and I think for Kiev, this is probably seen as a little bit of an end around of having to seek more and more aid from. Not aid from Western countries, but particularly getting, military aid, right? Now they could just get financial aid, and then they could do whatever they do within their government to fund companies and factories that already exist in Ukraine to produce munitions. So Ukrainian President Zelensky on Friday urged arm makers to produce weapons inside of Ukraine in his speech opening Ukraine's first international defense forum. Right now, for the next decades, the most powerful defense industrial complex are being determined. What their priorities will be, what their standard of defense in the world is, it is being determined precisely in Ukraine. According to Zelensky, the event was attended by representatives from 252 firms from 30 companies, helping to build Ukraine's military industry in part of NATO's plan to provide long-term support for Kiev. After Zelensky recently visited Washington, he said he reached a deal on joint weapons production with the U.S. So, again, I think this is going to probably help the situation for Ukraine to, get more funding to provide this military without directly coming from American military stockpiles. So there'll be probably less opposition to it from American Republicans. And I'm sure the Ukrainians see that as an advantage. Also, this is kind of an admission that the West is using Ukraine to war game for war with Russia. And so they're able to test their systems, their weapons in Ukraine. Now, my biggest question is are companies is Lockheed Martin or Raytheon prepared to spend, multiple millions of dollars in Ukraine to build a factory that if there's a war going on, Russia will probably just blow up? And so interesting to see how, this is all going to play out. But, the Ukraine looks like they're digging in for the long-term fight here too. British Prime Minister clarifies Defense Security Secretary's comments about sending troops to Ukraine for training. So the British Prime Minister, that's Rishi Sunak, on Sunday said that comments made by his defense secretary about sending troops into Ukraine for training are part of a long-term plan, not something that the UK will do in the here and now. And so this is some good news. The initial reporting on this seemed rather extreme, and we also do know that there's likely US, UK forces operating in Ukraine, at least helping the Ukrainians train and do some military planning, if not, outright involved in helping to lead missions or something like that. So that's probably covert. This would have been more explicit. And I think this is what kind of the West has been talking about a lot over the past couple of months, which is they really plan for this war to go on for years and years. in years, and then turn Ukraine into essentially like a proto-military rump state with whatever's left of the country after some kind of deal is signed at the end of this war. So anyways, that's the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more later in the week.